When we wrote smartImager, we didn't just look at how to make and manage images. We also wanted to look at how the deployment process should work. Because it's one thing to be able to make and manage an image, but it's another to be able to deliver that image to a machine regardless of where you are or where the machine is. For example, imagine being able to sit at your house with your smartphone and being able to image a machine for a sales guy who's in a hotel because he caught a virus. Or imagine being able to remote control a machine as you image it. Imagine being able to allow users to image their own machines through self-service, like through an email service or a web link. With smartImager, we rewrote the book on not only creating and managing images, but we also wrote a new way to think about deploying those images. In this video, I'm going to take you through a few features of smartImager, and I'm going to also show you why smartImager truly is a smarter way to deploy Windows. Historically, there's been two ways in which you capture or create images. The first is exactly that. It's a capture process. You set up a reference machine, whether it be virtual or physical, and then you capture that machine. You then distribute the image to other machines on your network. This has also been called cloning or ghosting, because basically you're taking a clone of one machine and you're then distributing that clone to other machines. Now over time, this has become hardware agnostic or device agnostic. So the drivers were either built into the image themselves or they were layered on afterwards, but you're still using the same process. The second type of imaging has been known as a dynamic install. This is also known as a scripted OS install because it usually involves heavy scripting or tasks or sequences of tasks. In this case, you're taking the media direct from Microsoft, usually volume license media, and you're laying that down. Then you're laying down a series of drivers, applications, and configuration settings based upon your needs. Now, both have their pros and cons. The capture process, which is where imaging got its name, is both fast and easy to do. But the problem with it is because it becomes hard to manage and it's not scalable. Anytime any of your applications change that are baked into that image, you need to create a new image. Anytime you wanted to add patches or updates to it, again, you needed to create a new image. On the other side, the dynamic installs are problematic as well because they do create an environment where you need highly technical staff in order to be able to not only create, manage, but to deploy them as well. Now, they're very scalable and very liquid, but they're very time-consuming to not only make, but to get right. Well, smartImager does both of these, but we do it very differently. As far as capturing the image, smartImager comes with its own image capture tool. It's a very easy to use wizard that walks you through the full process. So in a matter of a few clicks, you not only take the machine into audit mode, you can then update and patch it. You can also customize it, configure it in any way you want. And then smartImager will sysprep that machine and then send it up to the server to where you can use that image and deploy it. Or you can then take that image and add things to it or subtract from it during the deployment process. Now, as far as dynamic images go, smartImager also handles dynamic images, but we do it without the need of scripting. You don't have to have a heavy skill set in order to use smartImager. You can do incredibly complicated logical tasks through smartImager without scripting or without a task list. Let me show you how this is done, for example. Right here, we'll add a new image, and you can see that I have two already. I have a custom image that smartImager has transferred up for me because I ran the image capture tool, and I also have Windows 10 Enterprise. I'm going to add an additional one. Let's add Windows 10 1709, and I'll just name it 1709 to keep it simple and click Create. From here, all I need to do is tell it where my volume license media is. So I'm just going to select 1709, and you'll notice that I also have a Windows 7 image there. I'll add that as well. I can enter in my license key if I wanted to. I choose a configuration file, and the configuration files come with smartImager as well. I'll click Select and OK. That's all I need to do. I'll go ahead and click Save, and I've just added an image into smartImager. Now, something else smartImager does, it will automatically patch my images if I tell it to, and I'll go ahead and turn that on. So each and every night, this image will be patched. So every time I image a machine, it'll be patched to the latest and greatest security value of that day. I can also tell it to auto cleanup. What this means is to remove any superseded patches, and this keeps my image size smaller. I'll go ahead and click Save here, and you'll notice now that I have 3 images. I have a 1709, a custom image, and I have an 1803 image. Now the question would be, well, how does smartImager know which image to choose when you're imaging a machine? And that's all taken care of by something called compatibility. So if I go back to my 1709 image, I'm going to make this so it only goes on laptops. What I'll do is I'll go to compatibility, and I will just select laptops here. I'll choose handhelds as well, which will be tablet machines. So anytime I'm imaging a machine, if that computer is a handheld, like a tablet or a laptop, it'll use the 1709 image. If, however, it's any other type, it'll use one of the other images, whether it be a custom image or my 1803 image. Let me show you more of this as I create a new image for Windows 7. So I'll just call this Windows 7. And once again, all I do is go to my media and I tell it where my Windows 7 image is. I'll click OK. And then I'll choose my configuration file. In this case, it'll be a Windows 7 configuration file. And I will click Save, and on for my compatibility, I'll make this so it's only for my 192.168.2 network, right? So what I'll do is I'll search for that compatibility, and I'll do it within, so I'm using a CIDR rule here, within that network, which is my lab network here. All right, so if it's on the lab network here, it'll use Windows 7. If it's a laptop or handheld not on that network, it'll use Windows 10, 1709. And if any other conditions like a desktop, etc., it'll use either the 1803 or the custom image. Using compatibilities is very easy, and you'll see how we go through compatibilities in everything we touch. One good thing about smartImager and our capturing of an image or our using images dynamically from the media is that the images are treated the exact same way. It doesn't matter if I custom captured that or if I'm using it from the media. Both are treated the exact same. Both are going to be automatically patched if I want them to. Both are going to have their superseded patches removed if I wanted to. And I can add compatibilities to any type of image I want. This is the logic engine of smartImager. Basically, I say, here's what I want, in this case, an image, and I'm saying, under these circumstances, are you to use this image? Those circumstances then can be translated into any other piece of the imaging process, like drivers or applications or which domain to join, etc. So at this point, I'm going to show you one of the harder things to do in imaging historically, which is incredibly easy to do with smartImager, and that is, how do you support dissimilar hardware? How do you make your image hardware agnostic? That part is real easy. The reason it's so easy to make hardware independent or hardware agnostic images in smartImager is because there's nothing for you really to do. The manufacturers have done it for you already. smartImager is connected into each of the manufacturers, so when you want to support a model, smartImager can build that driver pack for you on the fly. Let me show you how this works. If I come in here and I go to my driver capture page, there's 3 ways I can capture images. The first 2 require me to point to any machine on my network or to be onto that machine locally, in which smartImager will create a driver pack for you from that particular model. The last one, which is a vendor pack import, is what's primarily used in order to create a driver pack. All we need to do is search for the type of hardware we want to support. So for instance, if I typed in Surface, it's going to go out to the Microsoft website and give me a list of hardware that Microsoft has. And if I type in, an 850, for instance, it'll go look at all the manufacturers, and in this case, HP is what comes up. If I type in like a ThinkPad, I'm probably going to get Lenovo's and etc. So if I type in Optiplex, right, I'll get some Dells back. And let's say I wanted the 7760 all-in-one driver pack for Windows 10. I would just click there and click Start Import. Now, in about 5 minutes, smartImager is going to reach out to Dell, look for that 7760 model, grab all the drivers for it, and create a driver pack for me dynamically. The whole process only takes about 5 minutes, and as you can see, it keeps a history of the driver packs that you've created. And you can see that there's a few that are under 5 minutes, some that are a little over, but by and large, it's about 5 minutes to support any hardware on your network. Now, it's one thing to be able to support hardware, it's another thing to distribute that image out, as I said earlier. And so now I'm going to take you into more of the deployment process, and let me show you what I mean by a smarter way to deploy Windows. By default, smartImager is a Pixie server, so that means that you can boot to any NIC device and smartImager will take over if you've enabled Pixie on your network. But you can still use the network without Pixie to image machines as well. smartImager comes with something called the image pusher, and the image pusher can either pull or push images via the network, and let me show you what I mean. From the dashboard, we can put in any IP address from any machine, or we can use the computer name if we'd prefer. Once we put in the IP address or the computer name, smartImager is going to go out and look for that machine and let me know if that machine is turned on or off. Now, in this case, the IP address I put in was for a machine that is turned on, but you can see here that I had put in an IP address or a computer name for a machine that is turned off. If it's turned off, I can turn that machine on remotely using a Wake on LAN packet or a Magic packet. But in this case, my machine is turned on, so what I'll do is I'll just click the play button to forcefully push out an image to that machine. Now it's going to want me to verify some credentials, so I'll do that. And that's because you wouldn't want anybody who is unverified to be able to image machines on your network without authorization. Now, what's happening on the client machine is smartImager has put in a tiny file, it's only a 7 megabyte file, that forces the machine to create a one-time use only partition in RAM. It then tells the machine to reboot into that single one-time use partition. Pixie will then, WinPE will then take over and call in smartImager, and smartImager will image the machine. And this is all done without Pixie being involved. Now, this can not only be a push, it can also be a pull as well. So you can put that 7 megabyte file in an email or on a web page and have any user click on it and then pull in that executable that creates that one-time use partition and images their machine as well. Keep in mind, it is password protected, so if you were going to use it as a pull, you can put in the arguments to put in the password or the key in order to make it work, or you can simply give one-time use only keys as well for your users to be able to pull that and only use it once. Now, besides using your network, smartImager also has a media creator for you, in which it's a tool that'll make your USB keys if you want to distribute your images via USB. Those USB keys are unique in smartImager because it makes that flash drive fully encrypted so you can't have rogue employees stealing software. It also has a self-destruct mechanism, so at any time you can turn that key off and make it so it's no longer usable. The key doesn't have to contain the entire image either. You can make it so it only includes WinPE, so in essence it's just a boot key that really never expires and can only be used to boot up a machine in which smartImager will then take over. Now that we've looked at some of the ways we can deploy the image, let's look at how to customize an image using smartImager. To customize an image, I may want to add applications, or I may say that the machine needs to join a certain domain, or perhaps I want to set some security settings on it. Well, there's a lot of things I can do, and all of these are categorized in something called components. So let's look over at what components are. And before we do, I want to touch base on being able to control a machine while it's being imaged. And let me show you that real quick. We had set this machine to image forcefully, and we pushed it and told it, hey, you need to image. If I click on it now from the console, smartImager will give me a one-time use password that I can copy here, and then I can use a VNC viewer in order to open a VNC session on that computer. So I'll bring it over here, and I will go ahead and type in the IP address. And then it will ask me for that one-time use password, because the session now is actually coming from the client, not from the smartImager server. I'll go ahead and close this. And when that session comes up, basically you're looking at the exact same thing that a user sees while they're imaging the computer. And here it is. You'll notice that it gives the user some information, but not a whole lot of things the user can do to break the process. Now, I do have the option to click details here, in which it will give me a full detailed log of what's going on during the imaging process. This log is then sent back up to the smartImager server, so I have a complete audit trail of exactly everything that happened during the imaging process. We're going to let this go ahead and continue to do its thing as it's now rebooting, and I'll go ahead and close that, and I'll show you the components menu, and we're going to start with the partitioning section, or how to carve up a hard drive with smartImager. Now you'll notice that in the partitioning section, I already have one listed, and it's basically saying I want to use the entire hard drive for a single partition, and that being the C partition, and then we've named it Windows. You'll notice that it also is creating a system partition for me. I can turn that off if I want to. However, if UEFI is set in the BIOS, it'll override these settings because UEFI demands a system partition to be made. Additionally, if you're imaging a system with Windows 10, Windows 10 also requires a system partition, so it'll overwrite that value in case you're distributing Windows 10 with it as well. Needless to say, smartImager handles both a GUID partition table like UEFI or master boot record. So it doesn't matter how your BIOS is set, smartImager will handle that automatically for you. I'm not going to save these changes, and I'm going to leave here. And I'm going to create a new way to carve up a hard drive. And I'll name this laptop partition. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that I want to name the main, or the primary partition main, and I'm going to leave it as a C letter, and I'm going to tell it to use 80 gigabytes for that C drive. And everything else I'm going to put on a D drive, and I'm just going to change this from bytes to everything left over and click Save. So what I've done here is basically I've said, okay, I want you to carve up the hard drive into two partitions. I want the C drive to be 80 gigabytes, and then whatever's left over I want you to put as the D drive. Now, earlier when we were talking about images, we were showing how it would know which image to choose from, and the same thing applies here. So in this case, I'm going to go to my compatibility tab, and I'm going to choose laptop because I want this partitioning structure to only go on laptops. So if I'm imaging a computer and it happens to be a laptop, it'll use this partitioning structure. However, if it's a desktop or some other type of device, then it will use the all C partitioning structure. With compatibilities, I can customize a machine to do exactly what I want. depending on what I use for compatibilities. And compatibilities are very, very easy to use and very easy to make as well. Something else I can do is I can customize the way a machine is named. So in this case, I have two customizations. One is to prompt the user for a name and have them enter a name. I can then validate that using a regular expression to make sure that they didn't fat finger something or that it meets my naming standard. Second way I've chosen here is to look up via a serial number. So what I've said is I want you to use the serial number, and then I want you to look up a file, and if you see that serial number, then I want you to use the name next to it. Now I can do that with asset tag or MAC address. I can actually use the serial number and asset tag as the name if I wanted to. Additionally, I can run a process on that machine, and whatever the output is, I can use that as the computer name. So I could say, go use this PowerShell file, and then whatever it returns, that's what I want the computer name to be. If I'm doing a migration, I can use the old computer name, or if I'm merely just updating the computer and just wiping it and replacing the OS, I can also use the old computer name. I can use the DNS name using an IP lookup if I wanted to. And of course, I can always prompt the user if all else fails. So there's many different ways that I can name a computer dynamically. One of the most used, though, is the way I've chosen here to use the serial number, and once it locates the serial number, to use that as a lookup in a file, and that file can be comma delimited or tab delimited. It's a simple text file. It's not that complicated at all. Now, one of the most customized pieces in any image would arguably be the applications piece. So in this next part, I'm going to show you how to customize an image with applications. It doesn't matter how I got the image into smartImager, whether I use the image capture tool or if I just use the image straight off the volume license media. Once I have that image in smartImager, I can now add applications to it, which will be dynamically added during the imaging process. So let me show you how that's done. At our console, we'll go back to components and then to applications. Now, applications is where we can add as many as we want, and we can divide these into application packs. For instance, I may have an application pack that is only suitable for the HR department. So I'll create these HR applications and then put them in an HR application pack. But let me show you how to put the applications in to begin with. I'll go ahead and click Create, and I'll add two applications here. The first being a popular zip mechanism called 7-zip. What I need first to do is tell it where that software resides. So I'll click Browse here, and I'll choose the 7-zip folder, which I had set up earlier, and I'll click OK. Second thing I need to say is, well, where is the binaries that I'm supposed to use to install it? And I'll click here, and you can see that there's a couple executables, one being a 64-bit installer and the other being a 32-bit. I'll select the 64-bit installer and click OK. Then I'll need to say whether or not I should use a compatibility. Do I want this executable to be installed regardless or not? Secondarily, I need to tell it how to silently install. Well, I know how to silently install 7-zip because I looked it up earlier. Basically, you just use a search engine and you just say silent install and then the name of your application. And immediately you'll get a lot of returns on how to silently install that application. In this case, to install 7-zip, you need to do a /s. So I'll just click Save there. And now I'll choose compatibility, and I want to make sure that 7-zip 64-bit only gets installed if it's a 64-bit operating system. And the reason I'll do that is because I'll clone this guy here, and I will do a 7-zip, and then I'll say 32-bit. And then I'll just choose a different binary. I'll choose that 32-bit binary. I'll click OK. And again, to install 7-zip silently, it's a /s. I'll click Save. But I need to change my compatibility here. So what I'll do is I'll do it a 32-bit operating system, not a 64-bit operating system, and click Save. So now, if I'm imaging a machine and it's a 32-bit OS, then it'll install the correct version of 7-zip, the 32-bit 7-zip. If I'm imaging a machine and it's a 64-bit OS, then it will install 7-zip using the 64-bit operating system installer. So extremely easy to use compatibilities, extremely easy to add software. Let me show you another popular title. I'll go ahead and install Google Chrome, right? So I'll name this Google Chrome. And Google Chrome comes in a different type. It's an MSI file. So I'm going to go ahead and search for it here. And here we go. I named it Chrome 64 folder. And in there, I'll grab the MSI file. And you'll notice that smartImager will install it using the silent switch QIN automatically. And that's because MSI files are standardized and the switches are going to be the same across the board. I don't have to keep that. I could actually alter it and say all users to make sure that Google Chrome gets installed to the all users profiles there. But in this case, I'll just leave it as it is and click Save. Now, this is a 64-bit installer, so on my compatibility, I'll want to say 64-bit operating system, so it won't be installed if you're running a 32-bit OS. And you'll notice that both of the applications, the 7-zip as well as the Google Chrome, has warned me and let me know, hey, you're not part of an application pack. So what I'll do is I can come here and add it to an application pack if I wanted to, but let me show you how those are handled via the application packs directly. I'm going to go into my default applications, and here you'll see a list of applications that I've already put in there, and I can include the ones that I've just added, and I'll include the 7-zip, the 7-zip 32-bit, as well as the Google Chrome installer as well. And I can arrange those in any way. Let's say I wanted to put 7-zip at the top. I could, force that to go to the top, or I can, insert before and say I just want this to go, before Adobe Reader, etc. I'll go ahead and click Save. So now what I've done is I've created two different applications, a 32-bit and a 64-bit 7-zip application, as well as a 64-bit Google Chrome application. But I'm not limited to executables and MSIs. I can actually do a myriad of different applications. For instance, if I wanted to use immutable packages like NuGet packages through a package manager like Chocolatey, I could install Chocolatey packages just by simply running a command, cmd switch C, which opens a new command shell and says Choco install Notepad++, in this case to install Notepad++. If I wanted to install that from the community repository, I can also make sure that I grab Chocolatey files from my own repository if I had that set up, and I'd merely just say where the source is. In this case, I'm installing EM-Editor using Chocolatey and just saying that the source is local to the machine itself. Now, I can also install scripts, for instance. So let's say I wanted to turn the firewall off, right? I've done that already, and you can see that there's no actual binary. I'm just really just calling a netsh file directly from the install command. I can also tell it to install PowerShell files or VBScript files or command files. So let me create that and I'll show you what I mean. And I'll just say script test here. And on the script test, what I'll do is I'll point it to a folder called scripts. And in this case, I'm going to say, okay, I want you to install a bat file. And in that case, it'll just call the bat file naturally. But if I didn't want to do the bat file, let's say I wanted to do a VBS file, and I clicked OK, you'll notice that it calls it via a cscript command. If I want to do a PowerShell file here, like to turn off the firewall, in this case, it calls that PowerShell executable file, and it does it using the execution policy to where it's unrestricted. There's no limitations to how and what different types of applications you can call from smartImager. It's very flexible, and you can align those in different application packs. So for instance, if you had a certain department that you wanted these applications to go to, you could do that. Or if you had a different business unit and they had their own separate applications, you could put all those applications into an application pack already. But one of the biggest ways to save time is by joining a domain group, a certain OU, dynamically. And so you didn't have to come in manually and then join it to the domain after it was imaged or to put it in the correct OU. smartImager can actually do that for you, and I'm going to show you how in this next portion. Once you've imaged a machine, you may want to join that machine to a domain, and you may want to put that machine into a specific OU. smartImager makes this very easy by providing a way you can leverage compatibilities against the different OUs on your domain or against multiple domains. So let me show you how that's done. If we go to Components and then Domains, here you can see I have a single domain entry, and it basically doesn't give an OU. It just will dump everything into the computer's OU bucket by default. So I'm going to create a new one, and I'm going to name this just laptop OU and click create. Now the first thing I'll need to do is enter a domain name, and so that can be any domain rather. And I'll put in our domain, which is the Circs domain on my lab here. I don't need to put in a domain controller. I can force one. Generally, it's a good idea not to, and that way it'll use any domain controller available. I will search the OUs on this domain though, and it'll give me a list based upon the domain I put up into that domain entry there. And in this case, I'm going to look for the laptops OU and click OK. The last thing I need to do is just enter the credentials that it will allow me to add objects or reuse objects there. So what I'll do is I will put in my name, or I'll put in the smartImager service account, which I know has the access, and I'll put in a password and click save. Now I can choose what it should do if there's a conflict that arises. For instance, that machine already exists, then what should it do? Well, if it'll create or reuse that object, I can have it to skip the domain joining process, or I can have it halt the imaging process altogether. Now, as far as compatibility goes, if I want to put a machine into the laptop OU and it's named laptop in the OU, I should probably choose it just for laptops, or maybe laptops and handhelds, and click save. So if I cloned this, what I could do is I can just name it desktops, right? The desktop OU, and then change where it's going. I could manually just type in desktops, or I can search for that over here. And what I'll do is I'll choose desktops, choose OK, and click save. So now when I image a laptop, it's going to be joined to the domain automatically for me and put into the laptop OU. If I image a desktop, it's going to be put into the desktop OU. You can imagine how granular this can get for you. Like if you are a school and you have a different OU for lab computers than you do for your staff, or if you are a managed service provider and you have different buckets on different domains for your clients. You can even imagine if you're a global provider, you may have different business units and your Active Directory structure may be quite complicated. smartImager can easily handle this for you. And while we're talking about Active Directory, let me show you something else we can do. We can actually look up the user's nested groups and make compatibilities based upon the user's nested groups. Earlier, I was talking to you about creating an application for the HR department, for instance. So let me jump over to compatibility and show you how easy it is to make compatibilities that you can use. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click create, and I'm going to name this user is in HR, right? So the user is part of the HR department. All I need to do is tell it what type of compatibility I'm making. And in this case, I'm not doing a test of a folder or a file. I'm not running a WMI query, although I technically could. I'm not looking at registry data. I'm not looking at the data that I'd prompt a user. In this case, I'm looking for Active Directory data. So I'll click Active Directory, and then I will search my Active Directory under the domain I want for what I'm looking for. And in this case, what we'll do is we'll grab this user named Tiffany, and we'll look at her nested group membership. In this case, we see that she is a part of that HR department. So I'm going to click select for that HR department. And you'll see that smartImager writes all that down for you. And all I'll do is click update and then save. And so very easily, I've created a compatibility that looks for user data and sees, is that user part of the HR department? If so, then this is true. Now I can apply that. So if I go back over to my application packs, I can create a new application pack and I can name that HR applications. Once I'm here, what I'll do is I'll add some different applications into that application pack. And I'm just going to choose some at random here. I'll just choose Notepad++, and how about Google Chrome? And I'll click Save. Now what I'll do is I'll go to Compatibility and I'll look up that HR department. And sure enough, I have the user is in HR, and I'll turn that on and click Save. And now, if in the beginning of the image process, I tell it to prompt and ask for the person's name that's going to get the computer, and all they have to do is enter a valid name in there, it'll go to Active Directory, look that up, see if that user is part of the HR department, and if so, it'll add the HR applications onto that machine all during the imaging process. Now, if I don't want to prompt and ask the user for their name, I could actually prompt and just tell the technician to choose what department they're looking at. So I'm going to show you that here. We'll go to User Prompts. I'm going to create a new user prompt, and I'm going to say, choose department. And in the message to the technician, I'm going to say, please select the department. And then I'm going to give him some choices. I'll give him IT. I'll give him, how about sales? How about execs and HR, of course. And, well, that's about it. I'll leave it at 4. I'll click Save. Now, all I did was create a user prompt and say, okay, during the very beginning, and all user prompts, any prompt, any user interaction is always going to be front-loaded. In other words, it's going to prompt you at the beginning, you answer the questions, and then you walk away. Now, under most circumstances, you would want to have a zero touch or no touch, but sometimes you have to prompt the user because there's some information that you may not be able to gather programmatically. So that's what this is for. Now, everything's going to be front-loaded, so when they image a computer, it's going to ask them first any prompts, they answer, and then they can walk away, and the rest is going to be completely automated. So in this case, I told them, well, I'm going to give you a prompt. It's going to say, please select your department, and it's going to give you 4 choices. While I was typing that, smartImager made those compatibilities for me on the fly. So if I go back to my application packs and I go back to these HR applications, and I choose compatibility, you'll notice that the first 4 listed are the answers which I could have chosen if I answered the user prompt. So in this case, I'll choose the HR and I'll click Save. So now there's 2 conditions in which the HR application pack will be delivered and added to the image during the imaging process. And if I look at that, it's going to be if the user is in HR or if the user or technician selected HR department in the very beginning, then this application pack is distributed. So you can see very quickly how logical you can create things very simply just by mouse clicks, not knowing how to do any scripting and not having to set up any task sequences at all. The last thing which I want to show you is, what if you want to migrate user data from one machine to another, or take that user data off a machine, image the machine, and then put the user data back on? And that last one is called user data transfer. Now, the unique thing about the user data transfer is there's not a whole lot I need to do. I just need to turn it on. However, I can customize a few things. So what I'll do is I'll create a new one, and I'll just name this user data transfer. And I will just click Save, and that's it. So If I wanted to, I could tell it, hey, I want you to use a transplant lookup file, which is just a text file that'll have a serial number and then tab, serial number, tab, serial number, etc. And basically it's a lookup file. And so it's saying, if you see this serial number, then I want you to look up to the next serial number on it, and I want you to transfer the user data from the one on the left to the one on the right. I can also state whether or not certain users should be backed up in that user data transfer mechanism, or if they should be excluded, or if the laying down or the restoration of that user data should be excluded from some users or not. I could set a compatibilities on it. So in this case, I could say, all right, if they're in the IT department, then I want you to do a user data transfer on that machine. If they're not in the IT department, then don't transfer the user data. But this is a great way for you to preserve user data if you're migrating from, let's say, Windows 7 to Windows 10, or if you're giving an existing employee a new machine and you want to make sure that the machine has the same things on it, like their signatures for Outlook, their desktop shortcuts, their favorite items, those type of things, the My Documents directory. If you want to make sure that that's all the same and preserved from one machine to the other, this is a great way to do that. Lastly, I want to talk to you about scaling smartImager. smartImager scales via CIF shares or UNC paths, so you don't have to create a server everywhere you want to deploy smartImager locally. You only need a single server, and a single server can handle all of your environment, not only locally, but globally as well. Now, to scale smartImager, all you need to do is set up a CIF share or a file share in which local users or clients on the local network can reach that local share. If they can't reach the local share, if you haven't distributed USBs and they can't see the smartImager server, then smartImager will image that computer from the cloud. Using a secure network and encrypted data, smartImager can image a machine from anywhere via the cloud. If you'd like more information on this or any of the other features I've touched on, please contact us at smartimager.com, contact us@smartimager.com. And if you want to try a 60-day free trial, just go to smartimager.com, register for a free trial. It's a full working version. Once again, if you had any questions or if you want a one-on-one demo, please reach out to us at contact us@smartimager.com.